Ivan the Terrible, a man who clearly needed therapy, but instead got a throne. One day, an uprising broke out in his kingdom, and during the chaos, a bell rang out to summon the rebels. Most people would blame the people ringing the bell, but Ivan? Oh no. He went straight for the bell itself. This man was so mad at a literal hunk of metal that he had it whipped. They lined up the bell and lashed it like it owed him money. Not satisfied, Ivan then exiled the bell to Siberia because clearly that was the only reasonable punishment for an inanimate object. Imagine the poor guards tasked with escorting a bell across frozen wastelands. They probably whispered to each other, "Does he know the bell doesn't have legs, or should we just let him have this?" Meanwhile, the bell sat there silently because, well, it's a bell. It didn't exactly have a choice, and Siberia, harsh winters, desolation, bears. But Ivan was like, "That'll teach you to chime against me, you clanging traitor." The funniest part? He acted like the bell would sit in exile, reflecting on its bad decisions, as if one day it might write him an apology letter. Honestly, the level of pettiness here is almost inspiring. Ivan didn't just hold grudges, he put them on sleds and shipped them off to Siberia. So next time you're mad at your alarm clock for going off too early, just remember, you can ship them to Canada. And believe it or not, this bizarre episode actually made sense in the context of Russian Orthodox tradition. In their faith, bells were thought to have souls, like actual souls, not just a cute metaphor. Bells were considered living beings, kind of like the VIPs of the village. They even had human-like names and anatomy. Marcus Licinius Crassus wasn't just rich, he was obscenely rich, and not because he worked hard or won the lottery. No, Crassus made his fortune by turning other people's tragedies into his personal piggy bank. The guy didn't just live in ancient Rome, he practically owned it. One fire sale at a time. Let me explain. Crassus owned Rome's first fire brigade, which sounds noble until you realize how it worked. If your house caught fire, Crassus and his crew didn't just rush in with buckets of water and hero energy. First, they'd stop and have a little chat with you. "Hey, nice villa you've got here. Shame about the flames licking at the walls. Tell you what, I'll buy it for half price right now and put this fire out. If not, well, good luck." Crassus turned firefighting into an extortion racket. He'd show up, bargain like a used car salesman, and only save the property if you handed it over to him for a bargain basement price. If you refused, he'd stand there and let the whole thing burn down while whistling a jaunty tune. And once he owned your charred remains of a house, he'd rebuild it on the cheap and rent it out for a fat profit. Crassus basically invented disaster capitalism and then perfected it while everyone else was still figuring out how aqueducts worked. The worst part? The guy got away with it. In fact, he used his absurd wealth to climb the political ladder, eventually becoming one of the richest and most powerful men in Rome. So next time someone complains about modern capitalism, just remember, Crassus was out here in a toga, playing Monopoly with actual burning buildings. So don't let rich dudes own the fire department. It never ends well. Hopefully, we can say the same about the healthcare system of America. Why capitalize on people's suffering? Caligula had some beef with Neptune, the Roman god of the sea. Why? Because why not? When you're an emperor with absolute power and zero impulse control, you don't need a reason to declare war on saltwater and crustaceans. But historians speculate that Caligula's tantrum might have had something to do with a failed invasion of Britain. His army was supposed to cross the English Channel, but rough seas made the journey impossible. Naturally, instead of blaming his naval commanders or, basic geography or weather, Caligula decided the real enemy here was the ocean itself, because clearly the waves were plotting against him. Caligula gathered his troops on the shores of modern-day France and gave them a stirring speech. Well, maybe not stirring so much as completely unhinged. "Listen up, men. That big wet thing out there, it's been talking smack about Rome, and I'm not having it." The soldiers, understandably confused, but also very aware that Caligula had the power to execute them on a whim, just nodded along like, "Sure, boss. Let's fight the ocean, I guess." What followed was one of the most ridiculous military campaigns in history. Caligula ordered his men to charge into the surf and attack the waves. Imagine a Roman legion, fully armored and highly trained, wading into the water and furiously stabbing at nothing. Somewhere, a school of fish was probably watching this spectacle like, "Yo, what's wrong with these land mammals?" After the battle, Caligula declared victory because, well, no one was going to tell him otherwise. And what's a victory without spoils? He commanded his men to gather seashells from the beach and haul them back to Rome as trophies of their glorious conquest. And if you think that's where the madness ends, hold on to your togas because we're diving deeper. Caligula's most infamous flex? Trying to make his horse Incitatus a senator. This wasn't just a pet with VIP privileges. Incitatus had a marble stall, an ivory manger, and even hosted dinner parties. Actual humans were invited to hang out with a horse over wine and cheese. Incitatus is smarter than half of you anyway. Cheers. Louis XIV. The man, the myth, the Sun King. This guy didn't just rule France. He rebranded himself as the Sun King. You know, because apparently the Earth spinning around the actual sun wasn't good enough. Louis had to plant himself right at the center of the universe. Imagine the ego it takes to wake up one day and think, you know what's missing from astronomy? Me. Louis wasn't content with just saying he was the cosmic VIP. He had to act the part too. His daily routine? A literal spectacle. Every morning, a gaggle of courtiers would gather to watch him wake up, just waking up. No action scene, no dragons. Just Louis blinking in the sunlight, probably thinking, the world has the privilege of seeing me alive again today. And then came the main event, getting dressed. And by getting dressed, I mean high-stakes sock handoffs. People genuinely fought for the privilege of handing him his royal sock. A sock. Can you imagine the chaos? I'm handing him the sock today. Over my dead body. You gotta hold the royal toothbrush yesterday. The ridiculousness didn't stop at the wardrobe. Louis also let people watch him eat breakfast. Let me repeat that. People willingly stood around to watch this guy munch on some baguettes. Did he eat golden croissants sprinkled with diamond dust? No, probably just regular toast. But when Louis XIV does it, it's apparently the social event of the season.
It will certainly be the event of the season.
Honestly, it's kind of genius in a how did he get away with this way. Louis somehow convinced an entire court of nobles that his every blink, breath, and bite was a moment of divine significance. Charles IV of Luxembourg had a very special relationship with his dinnerware. Forget porcelain or silver. This guy ate every meal off plates made of solid gold, but that wasn't enough to satisfy his royal ego. After finishing his meal, Charles would casually toss the plates into a lake like he was skipping rocks. Not because he didn't like doing dishes, though relatable, but to show off how absurdly wealthy he was. The best part is, Charles wasn't just flexing to flex, he had a plan. He'd send divers to retrieve the plates later. Early recycling? Or just rich guy weird flex? Who knows? But you can't deny the efficiency. Ramses II, the pharaoh who took self-love to absolutely unhinged levels. Forget selfies or Instagram reels. Ramses was all about 60-foot-tall statues of himself scattered across Egypt like ancient Yelp reviews screaming, "I was here!" Every temple, obelisk, and random patch of desert. Ramses was like, you know what this place is missing? Me! But bigger. Imagine ancient Egyptians waking up every morning to his face carved into every rock, like the world's earliest influencer ad campaign. And then there's Abu Simbel, the pièce de résistance of Ramses' ego trip. This temple is dominated by 4 colossal statues of himself, staring down anyone foolish enough to forget who is boss. Each one is 60 feet tall because apparently life-sized just wasn't doing it for him. It's as if Ramses thought, how do I make sure future generations remember me? Oh, I know, by building monuments so huge even aliens will stop by to say, damn, this guy really loved himself. Ramses didn't just slap his face on buildings, he even hijacked monuments from earlier pharaohs. He'd stroll up to someone else's temple, chisel out their name, and replace it with his own, such as Colossi of Memnon. Bold move, Ramses, bold move. To his credit, this strategy worked. Thousands of years later, we're still talking about him. It's 1740 something, and Catherine decides that a regular wedding venue simply won't do. A castle? Too basic. A cathedral? Snooze. So, she commissions a temporary ice palace. Because if you're going to celebrate love, why not make everyone literally chill while doing it? Guests at this glacial gala didn't just get to marvel at the architecture. Oh no, they got the full immersive ice experience. The chairs, ice. The tables, ice. The plates? You guessed it, ice. And the pièce de résistance? A life-sized ice elephant that could actually spray water. Because what's a Russian royal wedding without a frozen pachyderm acting like a glorified garden hose?